Welcome to the Foundation Day of Navrachna University. I am Dr. Nilay Yagnik, and I'd like to hand over the mic to Dr. Mandira, our head of the Communications Division.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Dignitaries, invited guests, faculty, staff, and students of Navrachna University, good evening and a very warm welcome to the Foundation Day celebration of Navrachna University. This Foundation Day celebration is to commemorate the day Navrachna University was founded, to commemorate the vision of its founders, and to celebrate the fabric that makes us all proud Navrachnites. Foundation Day is a chance to come together and celebrate our proud history with its exceptional milestones, with a community of students, staff, alumni, and well-wishers. Today, on this memorable occasion, we are indeed honored to have amongst us as chief guest, Mr. Santosh Desai, Managing Director and CEO, Future Brands Limited, author, columnist, and social commentator. I invite Ms. Mahima Vittal, student of the MBA program, School of Business and Law, Navrachna University, to introduce our chief guest. Mahima.
Thank you, ma'am. I wish everyone a very good evening and would like to introduce our chief guest, Mr. Santosh Desai. Mr. Santosh Desai is the Managing Director and CEO of Future Brands Limited. Future Brands is a branding services company that creates and manages a portfolio of brands and offers consulting services in the brand and consumer space. Before taking up this assignment, he was the president of McCain Erickson, one of India's premier advertising agencies. A postgraduate from Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, his interest lies in studying the evolving nature of consumer culture in India. He wears two hats, one as an authoritative voice in matters relating to brands and consumers, and the other as a social commentator, making sense of the complex changes India is undergoing. He has served on the board of ING, Vyasya Bank, and is currently on the boards of Future Consumer Products Limited, Oxfam India, and Breakthrough. He is also a member of the governing councils of Mudra Institute of Communication, Ahmedabad, and Praxis Business School, Kolkata. He has been writing a weekly column in the Times of India for over 16 years and is the author of the best-selling Mother Poise Lady, Making Sense of Everyday India, a book that examines how the everyday life of middle-class India has evolved. On behalf of Navrachna University, I welcome you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mahima. Thank you, Mahima. Sir, please give me a few minutes to take this program ahead and request you to deliver your Foundation Day lecture in just a few minutes, sir. Before we have your lecture, sir, may I request Srimati Tejal Amin, Chairperson of Navrachna Education Society, to share her thoughts on the journey of excellence.
Thank you, Mandira ma'am. Good evening, dear friends, and a very warm welcome to this Foundation Day celebration of Navrachna University, a virtual celebration, of course. We meet in unprecedented times, impossible to believe if we were not actually going through them. However, as a species, I'm sure we will survive, as we have survived many such pandemics and disasters before, and prove right the Darwin principle of survival of the fittest. We will overcome the pandemic, and I hope we will emerge wiser and make better, more sustainable lifestyle choices. Navrachna is a 55-year-old education society managing leading schools and education initiatives in and around Vadodara. Innovation, integration, and holistic approach are the cornerstones on which our education edifice is built. In 2009, when we established Navrachna University, it is these very cornerstones which formulated and articulated our vision and foundation. And it is this very philosophy which has informed the many focused and general programs which have been introduced and which are continued and which we continue to introduce as the university evolves and grows. We are unique in many ways. The most important is our multidisciplinary ethos, especially at the undergraduate level. Our across all programs initiative called Khoj, which was introduced by our former provost, Professor Malik, is a program which weaves together all the faculty and students to address issues of national importance as well as environment conservation and come together to come up with workable holistic solutions. It is this very aspect of Navrachna University which sets it apart from all the other private sector higher education institutions in our region. This is what will take us forward as well. I'm very happy to share that Navrachna University was the first university in Gujarat which moved from physical classes to online classes soon after the lockdown was announced on March 24th. Our faculty very quickly embraced digital technology. They worked through the lockdown, completed their syllabi, and even held their examinations, thereby avoiding the unpleasant option of mass promotion. I must congratulate our provost, Professor Yagnik, and all our program heads, program chairs, and faculty, and our registrar, Rajesh Paitalati, and his team for this very proactive and prompt response. We are well set to start our new academic session on July 14th, and we are well into our admissions for the fresh batch, which will commence hopefully by November. It is these baby steps to adapt to the new situation which will help us in finding our place in the new emerging normal. And a new normal it is definitely going to be. And Santosh Ji will talk more about it. And I'm sure that we will ring true the words of Nelson Mandela. Education is the most powerful weapon with which you can change the world. I'm very delighted that today we have Santosh Ji as the chief guest for this evening's Foundation Day celebration. I've had the good fortune of hearing him speak at a BMA CEO Forum lecture series many years ago. And since then, I follow his work. I'm a regular reader, Santosh Ji, of your column, City, City, Bang, Bang. Your articulation, your perspective on issues which affect us, which impact our daily lives, are truly very unique and give us much food for thought. We look forward to your address. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Srimati Tejal Amin, Chairperson, Navrachna Education Society. May I now request Provost Dr. Nilay Yagnik to address the gathering.
Thank you, Dr. Mandira. And welcome once again to everyone watching around the world. Thank you, Chairperson, Ms. Tejal Amin, for attending today's session and for your very kind words. I actually met Santosh in a Pan IIM conference a few years ago. This was held at IIM Kozhikode. And Santosh was a speaker there. I connected with him and I remained in touch. So that's why when we had this foundation day coming in, the first speaker I could think of was Santosh. And I requested him and he very readily agreed. Thank you so much, sir, for agreeing to speak to us on a very important day today, which is the foundation day of the university. The foundation day of our university, I mean, today is the 11th foundation day. It's 11 years since we've existed. And we've come quite a long way from a single program university. Today we have 26 programs, 14 undergraduate programs, 9 postgraduate programs, 2 integrated 5-year programs, and 1 PhD program. The Foundation Day, therefore, is a day for us to reflect as well as to strengthen our resolve as to, why we actually exist. And as you know, the reason, as what Ms. Tejal Amin mentioned, the reason for our existence is interdisciplinary, innovative, with a social conscience. That is the reason why our university exists. On the interdisciplinary side, I'm happy to tell you of several initiatives that our university took last year. One is, of course, the setting up the Center for Environment Research. And this particular center organized an extremely successful conference, international conference, with around 200 papers from around the world. We also have started a Center for Education Innovation, which I had mentioned to you in the previous Foundation Day last year. Again, to emphasize the interdisciplinary nature, the center had organized a very interesting dialogue across disciplines, where we had a speaker from New York State University. We had who spoke on neuroscience. We had some faculty speaking on artificial intelligence. We had a faculty speaking on learning. So we combined aspects of learning, neuroscience, artificial intelligence in a forum, in a learning forum. We also have a Center for Professional Education, which combines several interdisciplinary areas across schools, across the 5 schools that we have, for training both to corporate as well as to the general public, as well as to faculty of other schools and other universities. Today we will be launching a Center for Heritage Research, which is also an interdisciplinary center, and our Dean of the School of Architecture will speak about that. It's a university-wide center which will be of interest to all areas: management, law, engineering, as well as architecture. We have very recently tied up in an extremely important and a very relevant area today, which is public health. And we will soon be making an announcement. We have tied up with the University of Arizona to set up a Center for Public Health. And you will soon hear some more news about that. On the innovative side, which is the second pillar of our existence, our collaboration again last year with the North Dakota State University, initially in the field of architecture and later on in other fields, will also strengthen our resolve to be highly innovative. The University of Arizona Center for Public Health, we have also tied up with a company called GelRad, which is started by ex-GE people in the US, to offer corporate training programs in very relevant areas of both engineering and management. And we are starting the first session on the 14th of July, incidentally. Our life sciences team has tied up with a company in the US called Co-Diagnostics, which makes kits. And incidentally, the Co-Diagnostics in India, the Indian branch, was one of the first in India to offer the diagnostic kits for COVID. And our school has tied up with them, our School of Life Sciences has tied up with them for this project. As Madam Amin mentioned, we were the first mover, probably amongst the first in the state, to move all our programs online. And this crisis that we had of COVID was actually converted to an opportunity, because that is the new normal now. And it's a new opportunity for all of us. All 26 programs went online, whatever, in the middle of the semester. As educators, we all know how difficult it is to, in the middle of a term, to move from one mode to another mode. But everything was moved very smoothly. and examinations were held. Results have also been announced, and the new semester will start from 14 July for the seniors, the second year onwards. Another innovation, again connected with our pillar of innovation, is the School of Architecture virtual program, which was a global design challenge, where the School of Environment, Design and Architecture of Navrachna University set up a challenge, a design challenge to design open spaces in the post-COVID era, something nobody had thought of before. But this is something that was thought of by our school under the leadership of Professor Pratyush as to how open spaces should look like once everything comes back to normal. And we received entries from around the world. And the first prize incidentally went to somebody from the United States. All this was done virtually. On the social convergence, on the social consciousness aspect, the third pillar of our existence, as again you've heard, Khoj remains one of the pillars for our social work and social objectives. We've also done extensive research during the lockdown period to determine what is the level of preparedness of corporate India post-COVID era. We will soon talk about that in a day or two. So with all these new developments happening, I'm so grateful today that we have Mr. Santosh Desai here with us to enlighten us, our students, our faculty, and people around the world on what challenges are faced. What are the challenges being faced by society? What kind of challenges do students and youngsters face in these new times that we are living in? Thank you, and welcome, Mr. Santosh Desai. Once again, welcome to Navrachna University.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving a comprehensive picture of the academic endeavors at Navrachna University. We are indeed privileged to have with us today as chief guest, Mr. Santosh Desai, author, columnist, media critic, with keen interest in the evolving nature of consumer culture in India. May I request Mr. Santosh Desai to deliver the Foundation Day lecture, sir.
Thank you so much for the very kind words that have been said. And congratulations to everyone on the 11th Foundation Day of Navrachna University. I can see that in a very short period of time, the university has come a very long way and is doing a very impressive range of activities. And I particularly warm to the idea of a multidisciplinary kind of an approach with a social conscience, which I think is really something that the world needs today. So congratulations from my side on this day. I think the chairperson talked about the fact that these are unprecedented times. And I think that's a word that we cannot escape in today's day, because it is an unprecedented time. And I think sometimes what happens is that, words like, when we start using words too often, they sometimes lose their meaning because they just become a sort of an empty ring to them because you keep saying them over and over and over again. So I just want to spend a little time underlining that when we say unprecedented, this one time we really mean it. This is truly unprecedented for a number of reasons. I mean, there have been, events of a large scale that have impacted the world and set off cascading changes across the world. 9/11 arguably changed the geopolitical climate of the world. I mean, it changed the way nations interacted with each other, the certain kind of fear that came in. The world wars, I mean, who can argue about that? They were not hugely influential and changed so much about the world. But these, however strong their impact, was still limited to certain parts of the world, which were the theaters of action. And there were large parts of the world that were shielded from the impact, not so in this case. Here, everyone is in the same boat wherever they might be. The Spanish flu 100 years ago had an even greater impact, but it occurred at a time when information flows were much less efficient and much slower. So I think what we are feeling today is not just the physical effect of this pandemic, but an enormous psychological burden of perhaps having too much information on a daily basis, minute by minute. We are up to date with the death counts. We are kind of, those are the new metrics of our time. You know, what is the testing rate? What is the fatality rate? And these are things we can reel off because they are on the back of our fingertips right now. So I think what that does is it creates a climate of insecurity, uncertainty, and fear, which I think is absolutely unprecedented. And particularly because we live in a time where, you know, we think that we have been insulated from uncertainty. We think we have all the answers. We think that the world owes us a certain amount of stability and the fact that predictability. And then it's an unfamiliar feeling of helplessness that we are experiencing, and that we see both at a collective, societal, as well as at an individual level, this sense of not knowing when things will get better, not knowing, you know, as to when we can resume a semblance of normal life, and not knowing the impact on so many different parts of our life. So I think it is. So when we say that this is unprecedented, it's not just hyperbolic, kind of an overstatement. It is in fact the truth. It is an unprecedented time. And as Professor Yadnik said, there are a whole set of new challenges that this time sort of, you know, brings to us. I think at its heart, I think what I would argue is that what it does is that it exposes the hollowness of a lot of our mental models. You know, we have mental models are the implicit assumptions we make about the world we live in. It's how we process the world, not in a conscious sense, but it is the implicit set of expectations we have about the world. For instance, we believe the world is largely a stable place. We believe that the world, things happen in a broadly predictable way. Some disruptions do take place, but these are transient interruptions, and that things eventually return to normal. And this, therefore, we keep talking about the new normal because we crave the idea of normalcy. We crave the idea that this disruption goes away. That's why we keep talking about a post-COVID world, whereas it is possible that we will be living in a COVID world for a significant period of time. But our anxiety is to get beyond this quickly to the next part of this whole. So, you know, we are looking for the next episode in this serial to come quickly so that we can get on with the messy bit and get to the stuff that, you know, where we resume life as normal. It is interesting that in the long range planning, you know, and corporations, large corporations, huge corporations, governments, all of them have long range plans. All of them are supposed to think about the future, but nobody has been prepared for this. Not in a single corporate plan have I seen the idea of a pandemic being taken seriously, being prepared for. It is as if this is a sudden surprise. In fact, you know, the writer Nassim Taleb, who wrote the book called The Black Swan, and the Black Swan being these once in a kind of a, you know, blue moon kind of an events that come and shake up the world. He argues that it's actually not a black swan event. This is what he calls a sort of a gray swan event. This was something there for everyone to see. We went through MERS, we went through SARS. We knew a pandemic was in the very, very likely was in the offing. Bill Gates in 2015 very publicly sort of, you know, talked about the possibility of a pandemic, and yet whether it is a government, whether it's a corporation, everyone is shell-shocked because underlying assumptions of stability are something that are hardwired in us, and we find it difficult to overcome those. The other underlying assumption is that of growth, that things will grow perpetually. That perpetual growth is an entitlement of ours. That there is no option but for things to grow, the economy to grow, for our personal affluence to grow, for our lives to become better. It is a matter of right. And when growth stalls, or worse in this case, it gets reversed, and we are talking about the economy shrinking, we are talking about our lives shrinking, we find ourselves lost, unable to make sense of what is happening because our expectation is so deeply ingrained. Overall, whatever we have brushed under the carpet, the issues we have brushed under the carpet have come back to haunt us. Public health, for instance. And this is it's true across the world, but it certainly is true in India. It's been ignored for decades. It's been underfunded, under-resourced in terms of people, underplanned. And today, when we have a pandemic, you know, which is on us, we struggle to cope because of the fact that something that we should have been doing, something that was not difficult to predict at all, is something, you know, has caught us napping. What the other thing that the challenge that a pandemic poses is that it heightens disparities. It deepens the fault lines that exist in society. While the pandemic does not spare any class or social group, all of us are equally vulnerable. The effects are disproportionate. And we saw that in the case of the migrants in India, where the effects, the same, what a lockdown meant security for the well-off urban dweller, that same lockdown meant untold misery for a different set of people. So I think differential access to resources makes a huge, huge impact on how the overall effect of a pandemic like this. And it has thrown so much out of gear. Health, and I know, public health that I just spoke of, travel, hospitality industry, the economy, and so many sectors of the economy. Education. I mean, while education, I must say, has done an admirable job of adapting very quickly to the new situation. But the fact of the matter is that the life as we knew it for educational institutions has changed, and for students has changed immeasurably. And apart from that, you have issues like mental health, which I think so many people are today facing because of being cooped up in this very uncertain, unpredictable kind of a hothouse. And I think at a larger level, there is a climate of fear. There's a climate of fear and which breeds suspicion. So which is why we've seen instances which otherwise are indefensible of the fact that the very people who are working so hard and risking their lives to save us are being ostracized in parts of the country, doctors not allowed in apartment complexes and such like. So we see at one level, we see people coming together, helping each other, reacting as one. And on the other hand, we also see this whole spectacle of suspicion and fear which pervades our lives. So it's also interesting to see how political polarization can impact the response to the virus. I find it so interesting that in the US, the way the seriousness with this pandemic is seen is so dramatically affected by whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. I mean, it's almost like 70% of the people, the Republicans are arguing, this is a overinflated kind of a conspiracy, and a like equal number of Democrats believe the same. And it seems to me unthinkable as to how something which is a matter of life and death personally can be so colored by a political vision and a political affiliation. I think it's remarkable that politics has penetrated our lives so much that we can regard these kind of threats also through the lens of politics. But just as there are a whole lot of challenges, and I think this has already been mentioned, any momentous event is also an occasion for creative churn. It is an occasion where the old assumptions get overthrown, where the new gets a look in. There is a crack through which, as the songwriter and poet Leonard Cohen says, that there is a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in. It is through cracks in our world that the light gets in. Art flourishes in difficult times. Some of the greatest art in the world has come out in times of strife, in times of oppression. So, innovation multiplies under pressure. New ideas get a hearing. And I think that is the power of a time like this. The fact that because there is so much ferment, there is so much churn, I think we are much more open to challenging things that otherwise we have taken for granted. We are in a position to reimagine many fundamental ideas, embrace new habits, discard old ones. And that is the real opportunity today. And we can see that. We can see that in health. I mean, for the first time in a really serious sense, we have woken up to the importance of preventive health measures, the idea of immunity rather than treatment. We have been over-medicating ourselves for the last decades. Today, for the first time, you're realizing that there are limits to treatment. We suddenly find ourselves helpless. And we go back to the notion of saying, unless we build ourselves from within, there is internal resilience, we will not be in a position to combat a challenge of this kind. The openness, for instance, to telemedicine, something that has been spoken about for years. And then, when so many policymakers have argued that in a country like India, where there are such disparities in access, telemedicine is one way to bridge the gap. And yet it has not ever really made inroads. And now we are waking up to the fact that out of necessity, that is something that we need to embrace. We can see this in education. I mean, perhaps more than anywhere else. The fact that, yes, of course, sometimes it's a compromise, and online sort of a medium of education has limitations, but it also has, it enables a certain kind of learning which was not possible earlier. Most significantly, the idea of continuing education. So many people taking courses, trying to sort of learn something at stages of life where they had otherwise given up on the idea of learning. And I personally have always been amazed at the mental model we have of the fact that once in our lives for a period of 15 years or thereabouts, we stuff ourselves with education. It's like a concentrated medicine that we take for 15 years of our life, and then we live off that for another 70 years. And it seems to me to be absurd that we believe that kind of a one-time injection should suffice to see us through all the changes that would take place over decades. To me, it is a highly flawed view of education, the fact that we spend one part of our life being nothing but being educated, and the other part of our life saying that all my learning will happen through life, but I don't have any need to engage in any formal acts of education. And I think at a time like this, we are forced to look at options and say, actually, there is so much to learn, not just vertically in the sense of improving what we do in our main line of work, but horizontally, where we learn from other disciplines, where we follow our interests, and we are able, therefore, to become more integrated, more complete people. We are seeing it in the adoption of digital technology, where to some extent it was being adopted, but now, because out of compulsion, more and more people who are not shopping digitally, who are not banking digitally, this whole thing of this Zoom, what we are doing right now, it has been around. This technology is not new, particularly in the workplace. I end up spending about 12 to 14 days in a month traveling away from the family, on flights, staying in hotels. And suddenly I find that there was no need to do that. And it was always available to me. But somehow our mental models of the past forced us, and there was an inertia of a kind which made us, continue with the old without challenging it. So I think what we are seeing in so many ways, and I think in a particularly something that I would point to, which I think is really important, is the return of science and the scientific temper. I think this is something that we have over the last few years lost. Growing up, as a child, our instinct at that time was, if you saw any gadget, was to take it apart and see how it works. Of course, you always failed. You made a mess. You could not put the thing back together again. But the spirit of curiosity and learning, the question that we asked was, how does this work? In a technologized world, the question that we ask is not, how does it work, but what will it do for me? What are its features? Nobody takes apart a mobile phone because you can't. The digital technology, there is nothing to see. Even the new cars of today, when you look under the hood, there is nothing you can do. You cannot figure out how it works. What we have stopped trying to, that is, in a sense, science and technology seem to be the same thing or related closely, but they are very different in the way in which they are used. Technology produces an unthinking, unquestioning acceptance of the world around us. Science forces us to ask questions, forces us, there's a spirit of inquiry, a spirit of learning. You stumble, you fall, and which is what we're seeing around us, which is why we are all waiting for a vaccine to happen. And we are being taken inside the messiness of the scientific process. The fact that there are so many people working on it, but it's difficult because it's fundamental work. I think we are getting, therefore we are learning to respect science again, which I think is a wonderful sort of an idea now. Fundamental concepts are being challenged and reimagined. What is work? The meaning of work, its importance, its centrality in our lives. The division of gender roles in homes. When you are at home, the very easy kind of a separation of gender roles which used to take place is now up for negotiation. And it's an interesting new kind of a dimension to working from home. The fact that, you cannot take old roles for granted. The meaning of home by itself, which you would have thought is a settled matter. And suddenly you find a home is not one place, but we are streaming simultaneously streaming, different parts of our life. So in another room, there is another Zoom call taking place. At a third room, there is a work going on. And there are so many channels that are coming together in the idea of work. There is a real opportunity here. I think there is a genuine big opportunity in this crisis one could focus on the uncertainty and difficulties, particularly as students, of saying that I'm entering a world which is so uncertain, a workplace which is so challenging. And so a more adult world at a terrible time, because of the, this is a world which is not sure of itself. But what could otherwise, on the other hand, focus on the fact that this is a world which is waiting to be remade. It is a world which is asking and is open to answers of a new kind, which it was not earlier. And that there are new opportunities of several kinds. For me, the biggest starting point, if I were a student right now, is to focus on opportunities and focus on the fact that the older generation has been found out. We, the older generation, have been found out. We have been found wanting. We have no clue. I mean, you can see the fact that right now, the older generation is struggling. It has no preparation for this. It has no answers. And to me, this is very powerful for the younger generation to see that the world is looking forward and not only looking back to a set of formulae that exists, so saying, apply these, conform, but in fact is asking of the new sort of the entrance into this world to say, think of new answers, challenge old notions, because we need these kind of a fresh, original thinking. And therefore, this opportunity to come unstuck, because I think in so many ways, I mean, the world has got stuck in a certain way of thinking. When you think of, you talked about sustainability, and you look at where the world has got stuck in questions of climate change, because there is almost an assumption that you can't really change the way that we do things. So within that, we will have to make minor adjustments. And I think this gives us an opportunity to actually say, let's not go back to normal. Let's create a new kind of, let's embrace new modes of living. In a more concrete sense, this means there are new professions that will come to the fore at a time like this. There are new technologies. I mean, as we see, say, virtual reality as will need to come in when you are transacting so much work over digital media. The fact that there is more richness in the experience is something. Experiences will have to start coming through an online kind of a format. New concepts, a lot of which we have spoken of. And I think more significantly and at a deeper level, there are so many questions to which we have stopped looking for answers. The problem of overconsumption, the fact that at this time we've suddenly found that we can make do with so little. We have out of compulsion in the last few months. When I think this is an experience a lot of people I've heard talking about. When I go to my wardrobe and I look at my clothes, and I'm saying, why do I have so many shirts? Why do I have so many? And you never ask that question otherwise. But when you look at it today, you say, I have subsisted in the last few months with 4 sets of clothes, and I'm wearing a shirt for the first time, I think, in the last 4 months, because this is an occasion of some gravitas, and I thought it was only fitting that I give an airing to something that has been locked up for such a long time. But I think you realize the limits of the idea of consumption, the idea of the material quest that you have. You see the problem of inequality. The fact that you ask yourself, why is living in urban spaces? I have come away to the hills, in a sense, because it's something that one always wants to do. But it forces you to question, why live in a dystopian urban kind of an environment where the pollution, where everything around you is going to seed, but we somehow find ourselves helpless to change that reality. And of course, the question of climate change, which I think is a looming threat of a kind that I think will dwarf this pandemic. All of these are questions to which answers are being sought. The world, the world that I came from was a kind of a status quo world. I try and argue this by saying that, in a sense, that the showcase education, the degree for the last few decades has been the MBA. And I mean no disrespect to people who are doing their management currently. I am an MBA, so I say it simply as a matter of fact that was, in some cases, the world was run by managers. Managers, to my mind, are rearrangers of the status quo. Essentially, that's what management is. It's a resource allocation program, the MBA is. It's an optimizing program. You move pieces around in order to get efficiency. The world of today does not need managers, it needs creators. And I think that's the fundamental difference. the world that the students will get into is not about rearranging the status quo. It is about fundamental acts of creation. You look at the world around us, whether it's business, whether it's the arts, you look at, you will see that the people who are coming to the fore are the people with ideas, with new concepts, with new businesses. And that's why you see so many startups with such young people doing impossibly well, unimaginably well. Because it is a world where originality is at a premium, where knowledge itself is a given, by itself is not what you do with knowledge. The perspective that you have, knowledge you can Google, right? Perspective you cannot, point of view you cannot. And I think that, to my mind, that is the most powerful idea that exists today. The most powerful opportunity that exists today is for the young to sort of embrace their own originality, to the importance of bringing, yourself to what you do. I think that is really the key that would, in some ways, sort of fire, I think, the imagination of the time to come. And I think that just does not involve looking forward. It also involves, again, learning from a vast diversity of sources, including the past. I think the past is an important source of learning, because I think we forget very often that, we are part of a continuing chain of life. I mean, I find, the Buddhist philosopher Alan Watts, I think, said something which I find very interesting. He said that, we always talk about being born into the world. We think that we are the event, we are born and now it is our responsibility to do something. He says we should actually be thinking that we have come out of the world. We have not come into the world. Like a leaf comes out of a tree. We have not been born into the world, but born out of the world. And I find that a very powerful metaphor to in some ways grasp the extent to which, and the fact that there is continuity. We are part of a continuing sort of body of knowledge, of learning, and we are just one link in a long chain. And I think it's important to sort of to grasp the fact that we carry, I think, so heritage is an important part of what we carry to us. The beat poet Gary Snyder, in fact, I think, said a wonderful thing, that we are all primitives of a future civilization. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about, that, we think of ourselves as modern. We think of ourselves and then we think of the tradition as something that is frozen in the past. Actually, we are creators of tradition. That's what we do. And then the future civilizations will think of us in the same way as we do when we look at a Victorian civilization and say, oh, that is archaic and that is old. We are, in the future, we are always going to be primitives of some for a future civilization. So overall, I think if I was to sort of conclude, I would say this is an unprecedented time. I think it is a time that presents formidable challenges. And I think and there is no shying away from the fact that there is a whole range of new questions, new challenges that I think have been posed to us as a society and to us as individuals. But every manthan of this kind, every churn of this kind is an opportunity to recreate the world, but this time in our likeness, this time in a way that works for us. And particularly, I think, as students, as people who are, I think, at this time, sort of absorbing all the learning that is coming your way, and then using it, as you step out into a sort of a wider world, I think have the greatest ability to do. So we are seeing this in whatever form, in the US, for instance, the fact that there is such a strong social movement that is being driven by the young, again, aimed at changing and challenging an injustice of a kind that has been systemic and has been institutionalized. And the energy is coming, again, from the younger generation. And I think particularly in an ethos like Navrachna University, which believes in multidisciplinary learning, which believes in innovation, which believes in looking at the world in an integrated sense, and in an ecological sense. And by ecological sense, I don't only mean in an environmental sense, but the ecology of a system which has interconnecting parts, and recognizing that we must be responsible not for individual elements, but for the ecosystem as a whole, where society, business, the arts, science, all of them are part of one single ecosystem, and where one must understand the interrelationships and have a responsibility to all of it. I think that I think is a remarkable sort of a starting point to begin with. I think, like I said, there was an earlier generation which I think had a good game when it came to talking about things. But I think what we need now is action. What we now need are really new, original ideas. And this is a time, I think, there is an opportunity here, and I would urge all of you to embrace it. Thank you very much for your patience and time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We thank you for an insightful presentation. We are grateful for the time and effort you took to share your thoughts and experiences. Some key takeaways from your session were, we need to address the hollowness of the mental models we have had so far. Thus, though there were indicators, we were not prepared, exposing several lacunae in our systems and our inclination for status quo. But the most important learning that we had from your lecture today was that any crisis is opportunity for learning, for innovation, growth, and to embrace new habits. Ultimately, bring about meaningful change and renewal in every aspect of life. Thank you, sir, once again. It was a very insightful presentation. And I'm sure the audience would be having many questions. We will be having a question answer session shortly. We request you to keep your questions ready. And now, taking this program ahead, Navrachana University offers undergraduate, postgraduate, and doctoral programs across a wide range of disciplines: liberal studies, engineering and technology, pure sciences, business and law, environment design, and architecture. It also has launched a few centers of excellence: Center for Professional Education, Center for Education, Innovation and Research, Center for Environment Research and Innovation. Today, on this occasion, I invite Professor Pratyush Shankar, Dean, School of Environment Design and Architecture, to say a few words about the upcoming Center for Heritage Research.
Thank you, Mandira, for this introduction. And thanks, Mr. Santosh Desai, for this really inspiring lecture. This is also a fanboy moment for me because your book, Mother Pious Lady, has been with us for last 10 years, and it has given us so much to talk about in the family. So thanks for everything.
Thank you.
I'm quite, there are so many parallels between what you just said and what we should be doing as a community of architects and designers. And I would go and start with the procedures for opening the Center for Heritage Research. So I'll begin. Mr. Santosh Desai, Ms. Tejal Amin, Chairperson of Navrachana Education Trust, Professor Nilay Yajnik, our Provost, all members of the board, Rajesh Talati ji, our Registrar, colleagues, students and guests. It gives me great pleasure to stand here in front of you for the launch of Navrachana University Center for Heritage Research. But before I request Ms. Tejal Amin and Santosh Desai to inaugurate the center, I would just like to say a few words as to what was the motive behind starting this center. And I'll just share the screen so that one slide can be up there for everyone to see. So we at School of Environmental Design and Architecture at Navrachana University believe that discussion on our heritage is a sign of a mature society. It should not be and simply cannot be a romance of the past, but rather it is about livelihood and sustainability. What past does, or idea of history or heritage does, is it helps us critically make sense of the present. So our interest in history is not about a kind of a naive elitist romance, but about how we look at our own world today. As they say, the past shows us the way to the future. When we use the word heritage here, we are not only referring to built heritage, but also heritage of craft, sciences, technology, and other visual culture. we wish to have a more holistic view of idea of heritage, acknowledging the interdependency that are inherent in any society, which is also why we have this center. And we see this as an opportunity to work with other schools in Navratna University, creating a culture of interdisciplinary collaboration, much in line with what Professor Nile was talking about. I see centers as places that brings different people together. So for us, the question of heritage is simply not a question of what we need to safeguard for the next generation, but more importantly, a means by which we develop a critical thinking abilities in our students, in our faculty members, deepen a culture of research, and sharpen our teaching pedagogy, and use the experience, knowledge, and more importantly, enthusiasm. I mean, students are very enthusiastic about questions of heritage and creating things from the past. Use this enthusiasm of our faculty members and students to bring about real change in this world around us by engaging with communities and local groups. This intervention can be in form of publications, workshops, community events, and even policy recommendation. We hope to carve a place as a center known for its deep research, commitment to academics, and a fresh perspective and an innovative perspective about the future. So this center has to be about future while using heritage as a lens to critically examine the present. That's what we are looking at. So we at Navratna University are very excited about the possibilities, and we are really looking forward to the work that can happen here. And now I would like to invite, now this is a bit of a trick in a virtual mode, Ms. Tejal Amin and Ms. Santosh Desai to open the center, and you have to say a yes. So Ms. Tejal Amin, do I have your permission to open the center?
Yes.
Mr. Santosh Desai, do I have your permission to open the center?
Yes.
Great, so the center is now declared open.
Oh, lovely.
So this is the drawing of one of the iconic buildings of Baroda, designed by Robert Chisholm, a British architect hired by the Prince. At that time, the whole idea of social reform was very important. And this is presently the arts faculty of MS University. And we thought it's only apt to use a drawing that has been done by my colleague. Use this drawing as a symbol of this center. So thank you, everyone. And we hope to do great things out here. Thanks.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Pratyush.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Best wishes to you and all the faculty, your team at SEDA.
Right.
I'm sure that this center will bring together not only students of Navratna University, but academicians across the country and from overseas over time to study heritage, to conserve it, to learn from it and move forward.
Thank you, madam. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Santosh Desai and Srimati Tejal Amin. Wish you all the best, Professor Pratyush. We will now have the question and answer session. We invite questions from the audience, and I request Dr. Darshi Bakshi to please coordinate.
But before that, I also want to mention something, Dr. Sikdar.
Sure, ma'am.
Santosh ji, I want to share with you that, you know, besides having done our examinations and everything on time, our Navratna University campus is also COVID ready for social distancing and for sanitation and, you know, washing of hands. Pratyush has designed, you know, portable, movable washing sinks, wash basins, which will be placed across the university. There are markings for movement so that you don't come across each other face to face, and so on and so forth. So our campus is also ready, much before it was needed.
Quite well.
Thank you,
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah.
Dr. Darshi.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. And we have a few important questions from some of our faculties of the university. The first question is from Dr. Sandeep Patil, who is the program chair for chemistry. And his question to you, sir, is this perturbance caused by the pandemic has provided a lot of alternatives to travel, work from home, etc. but there are limitations too. In the long run, what happens to travel, tourism, aviation industry, public sector, and even education? So he wants to know little insights from you, sir.
Yeah, so obviously, obviously those are some of those are really big challenges, and I think, for instance, travel, I think is something where there is a fundamental problem there in terms of certainly certain modes of travel. So I think some kind of reordering is likely to take place. One is, of course, I think there's a great challenge for a design professionals of all kinds, for architects and design professionals, because I think the meaning of space will need to be fundamentally changed, and the idea of public space, shared space, how do you divide sort of space, technologies of recirculation of air. So there are some implications on space management, some implications and some innovations that are called for, which will, I think, enable travel as we know it. But along with that, there will be new modes. I personally think that road tourism is something that is likely to really kind of change and become much more significant going forward. And I think in India in particular, while there is some sense of road-based tourism, but I think there is a lot more that can happen, which can allow people to actually travel much longer distances, which will mean over a period of time change of infrastructure, the ability of the hospitality sector to sort of to enable this process. But like you have in the West, where you can actually go from a coast to coast, for instance, in the US, driving trips and driving holidays are possible. I think you will find that kind of an adaptation take place. So I think one is because there are lots of sectors, and I think all of them will have their own story. But the principle of it being is some is a sort of adaptive innovations that allow us to resume what we did earlier. I think that is one. And the other is a fundamental change in the meaning of some of those ideas. So hospitality, again, being much less the big centralized offices or the hotels, and more decentralized, smaller kind of units of hospitality. So one is, I think one is adaptive innovations, and the other is a structural kind of a restructured kind of solutions to some of the old ways of doing things, finding new ways of doing things. And in some cases, there will be fallouts of a significant kind, because not everything can be adapted or changed. And I think to argue that nothing will fail or nothing will collapse or there will be no change of that kind at all, I think would perhaps be a little optimistic.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the next question is from Mr. Ravi Sevak. He's also faculty with Navrachna University. And his question to you, sir, is, what was the most innovative idea or solution that Future Group applied to overcome challenges during COVID-19?
Well, right now, I don't think the Future Group is a great kind of an example of overcoming challenges, because I think it is facing a few significant challenges, which is outside the COVID situation. But I think one of the most, I think in any, an industry that is based on essentially on physical access. I mean, the retail industry is essentially about people coming to you, a centralized place to shop. I mean, that is the basis of any retail format. And that fundamentally changes, right? So you have to reverse that and say, and you're not a digital player. So if you were a digital online player, it doesn't matter. You can, access is created through a different mechanism. So I think here what needed to be done very quickly was the fact that you had to become, each retail unit had to become a delivery hub by itself, and had to find ways of reaching consumers in a very short period of time, virtually overturning your business model, your way of working, and finding ways of reversing the kind of a flow of that traditionally retail had, which is that people came to you and now you needed to go to people, and you couldn't do it in the way that digital companies did it, so you had to do it out of your physical hubs. I think that was, the speed and the fact that one was able to do it, I think was one of the biggest innovations of this time.
Okay, sir. Another question from Mr. Yogesh Chaudhary, again a faculty with Navrachna. At what point and area does Future Group look for solutions from academia to overcome new challenges faced by Future Group in delivering the services during and post-pandemic era?
I'm not sure that in this era, necessarily one is looking to academia, But I think in a larger sense, I think there is a strong sort of a conceptual and if you like, a philosophical kind of a core of the business, which tries to understand, I think, and which is, I think, has been a characterizing feature of the group, which is to instead of looking at business only in a transactional and operational sense, I think to try and understand. So, for instance, a lot of work that was done in terms of understanding and working with academia of multidisciplinary kind of a kind in trying to understand technology and its effects on society. The other work that is done is in the area of understanding memes and understanding how cultural sort of modes of cultural transmission, how do they take place? How do new habits get created? How does behavior change take place? Again, a fair amount of interaction with academia to try and build a sort of a point of view on that. On mythology and saying how do you use mythology both as a form of storytelling and at a structural mythic level, how do you understand how myths come about and what role they play in our lives? I think that is another area that the Future Group has interacted a lot with academia on. So I think there have been many different areas where the attempt to understand both human beings, societies, technology, and their interaction at a more philosophical and academic level has been an ongoing sort of a pursuit. I'm not sure that necessarily translates into a short period like the pandemic, but I think preceding that, there has been, I think, a lot of work there.
Okay, sir. One more question from Pratyush Sankar is for you, sir. And he says, are you working on a new book? If yes, which one? If no, what are the new areas you wish to explore as a scholar?
So the dishonest answer to that question is that yes, I am working on a new book, but I've said that for the last 10 years. So I mean, I am sort of running out of credibility when I say that. But so I have kind of the problem is that I've flitted from one idea to the other. So I'm kind of sort of stranded, I think, in between those ideas. But I think some of the areas that it certainly interest me currently is technology, and it's one area is technology and its sort of invisible intent and what it has been and what it points to. Social media in particular and its effects on society and what one is likely to see. And in a sense, an attempt to, and also another area that we've always been working on is of course making sense of India, which is an ongoing pursuit. So the first book was about that. But I think now with so many changes between 2010, when the first book came out, and now politically the world has changed, technologically the world has changed, societally we have a completely new set of issues. So I think again, kind of making sense of India all over again, I think is the other kind of option. So I don't know where it will come to rest and when, but yes, those are the things that I'm kind of thinking about.
Another question is from Mr. Bibas Kumar Basu. And his question is, what are the 2 to 3 things, according to you, that can be done to improve the business continuity or business resilience?
Well, I think certainly, I mean, I think at this particular point in time, the most important thing is to stimulate demand. I think because that, if you look at the business system currently, I think one of the things that is very important to do is find ways of stimulating demand so that there is a sort of because something has to keep the engines going. So liquidity there exists currently because of the fact that nobody is actually is looking at anything new, and the supply chain etc. gets activated when there is an engine that starts, and the engine has to come from consumer demand. The other is to create and help create an atmosphere which reduces the fear. Because I think the part of the problem is, when we talk about the fact that there is a lockdown and people are not going out, but that's not the problem. The problem is the fact that even if there were no lockdown, people are not going out because of the fact that they are legitimately afraid. And unless there are, as the chairperson talked about, getting the campus sort of a COVID ready, I think unless businesses are really serious about getting a sort of a workable solution to being able to, venture out and to allay the fears that exist today, I think one is going to find that extremely difficult. And I think the third is, and it at one level, it's a relatively small part of the ecosystem, but unless businesses take care of their employees well, and unless they look after their employees well, I think what the danger is of the fact that when the business system starts working, you don't have the people to actually to service that. And I think even at a philosophical level, I think it is indefensible for businesses that have been around for decades to find that, a 3 months adversity they cannot weather, and that they have to turn sort of to look at downsizing or actually affecting employees' lives in order to sort of survive. And I think these are some of the things that I think if businesses were to focus on, I think it would help ease the current problem.
Okay, Dr. Robbie Augustine has a question. He says, post 9/11 has witnessed a polarization, as Dr. Samuel Huntington pointed out. Likewise, what would be the new global world order or the new Cold War in the post-pandemic era?
It's anybody's guess. It's anybody's guess. That's it's a big question. But I do think that, it can go one of two ways. And I think one certainly is the fact that authoritarianism will rise even more. I think, and what we have seen is a democratized version of authoritarianism. It's that enjoys democratic legitimacy. And I think that, to my mind, is something that will, is likely to continue, because in a pandemic-driven situation, I think what it does is, A, it allows governments to take greater control. B, there is a certain amount of ceding of control that takes place because of fear and the fact that you believe that unless there is a strong kind of a authority that is being exerted, then things will kind of fall apart. So I think you would gravitate to I think even a more kind of a more extreme forms of authoritarianism. On the other hand, we are also seeing pushbacks, and to some extent, I think the 2020 US election will be an important kind of a milestone there, because if it moves and if it stays with what it is currently, then I think we can look forward to, I think, at least my own view is that, to a much harsher kind of a world, which is a much less gentle, much more unkind, much more driven by divisions. If it moves in another direction, and there is a kind of pulling back, not that the US is the world, and not that will necessarily affect everything else, but at least it starts creating an alternative vision and an alternative kind of a movement, which I think could over the years gain momentum. But right now, if I had to bet, I would say that I think we are moving towards, I think, more centralized, authoritarian kind of political systems.
Okay. Dr. Archana Tomar has another question for you, sir. What kind of creators we will have to create in this new normal?
Well, I think you will need creators of all kinds. I think you will need creators, from a creative area, from the arts. You will need creators, who come from, in terms of invention, in terms of innovations in everything that we do. Because this has such wide-ranging impact. Because it's cutting across so many fields of endeavor. I think this is not the pandemic affects virtually all aspects of our life, and therefore the creators that have to emerge now are the ones beginning with the more fundamental questions of the kind that I spoke of, to, I think, to all the sectors in our life. I think you will find creators will have to come up. And I think also, I think, and I think that is a particularly kind of an energizing prospect if that happens, because it is not just about a small part of our lives, but we're talking about potentially overhauling so many different aspects of our life. New businesses at one level, new forms of art at another, architecture, for instance, that Professor Shankar was talking about. I mean, it's such a huge challenge and such a huge opportunity to reimagine the notion of space itself, the idea of socializing, and what it means to create social interactions of a new kind. Virtual experiences, how do we enrich them? And that's a completely different entertainment, because, right now, cooped up as we are, I mean, we are so much open to new forms of entertainment. And while, a phenomenon like TikTok has its critics, I'm a huge fan of just the unbridled creativity that you can see of people who never had access to a stage and an audience before, being able to use the material just available in their everyday life, and to create such inventive new forms. So I think that, it's not high culture, low culture. It cuts across class, it cuts across sectors. This opportunity, I think, is genuinely democratic kind of an opportunity across the board.
Okay, sir. There's an interesting question from Venkat Narayana, and he says, what is likely to be the idiom for India in the decade ahead?
Let's say that's a, to sum up anything about India in a sentence of any kind, I think is a foolish kind of an attempt. So I don't know, but I think certainly, if we in some ways taking a leaf out of this whole endeavor of going back to heritage with a view to the future, I think that, to my mind, that is as good a way as any of articulating sort of an idiom, which is to say that, I think we are in a mode where we, I think, want to connect with our past. And I think that is welcome, as long as we connect with the past, not in a narrow revivalist sense, but in a way to recognize the fact that tradition is a living thing. And that tradition is not about going back to the past. Tradition is actually about creating the present in continuity with the past. And I think that, to me, that idiom of saying, let us embrace the spirit of the past and not its letter, and let us take that forward into the future, I think would reconcile, which would align with a certain political movement, but reconcile it with, impulses of a higher kind, a more noble kind, perhaps.
Okay, sir. There is some of the last questions now from Dr. Amit Patwa. He wants to know whether social media marketing is a stronger medium to go for than print or radio in the current times and the upcoming times.
Well, yes, at a certain level, I think it is true. I think look, the fundamental difference, I think, is the fact that there are the old media forms there. When you look at marketing is fundamentally intrusive there. It basically is saying that the price that you pay for being interested in anything is advertising. So if you're interested in reading something in a magazine, then you have to pay the price for an ad that comes in the way. If you're wanting to watch a television program, then the price of your interest in something is advertising. So you will have to suffer us, because we are the people who fund and make that content possible. That is the old model. The social media model and the digital model is saying, my advertising will be aligned with your natural path of curiosity. I mean, that's the fundamental difference, which is to say, I will not intrude into your consciousness as much as I will say what I will become as much as possible a seamless part of what interests you. And I think, therefore, you are seeing advertising of a new kind, where either you have the Google search kind of a paradigm, where if I'm looking for something, then the advertising that comes there is aligned to what I'm looking for. So there is a relationship between my search and the advertising that comes. If you're seeing other kinds of content-based advertising, then again it is based on what people are interested in, and you recognize the fact that you cannot force people to sort of listen to you, regardless of how much money you have. I think so. This is a fundamentally different model. I think the social media model is certainly a more consumer-friendly model, because I think it is not intrusive fundamentally. But it's also more difficult, because if you are saying that because unless you are interesting, people will not be interested in you. And advertising earlier and marketing did not have a responsibility to be interesting, did not have a responsibility to actually sort of be a part of people's lives in the same way. Now it does. So overall, I think it can be more effective, but although it's a little more difficult also.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think that was the last question which we had for you. Thank you for those insightful answers. And I would like to hand over to Dr. Mandira Sikdar once again.
Thank you, Dr. Bakshi. Thank you for coordinating this session. Mr. Santosh Desai, sir, I am reminded in a blog, Obsoleteness of Education, you had written, and you had expressed a concern that knowledge must free itself from a purely utilitarian perspective in favor of knowledge for knowledge's sake, giving plenty of thought to us as academicians. With this powerful message, we come to the end of this program. We thank you once again, sir, and I request Dr. Vandana Talegaonkar, Associate Professor, School of Liberal Studies and Education, to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Mandira. I am privileged to propose a formal vote of thanks on behalf of Navrachna University. Thank you, Shri Santosh Desai, for unpacking the present complex, difficult, critical, unprecedented times. Understanding is very important if one has to chart a path forward. And I think this has helped us. What is very important in what you today conveyed is there is an innate desire in all of us to look for normalcy and to achieve it. Now, what would be the nature of normalcy is a question, and everyone has already begun to speak about a new normal. The new normal definitely questions and is not based on the old notions and seeks creation of new ideas, or as I would like to say, playing with, toying with ideas, practices, and notions. There is a return of science and scientific temper that is so evident all around us. And equally important is the multidisciplinary perspective that each one of us is going to require to develop to understand this world and do well in this world. There is a great opportunity in this world, as you have said, and the students have a great opportunity for themselves as all old rules are getting broken. Thank you so much, Shri Santosh Desai, for accepting the invitation to deliver a talk on the Foundation Day of Navrachna University. I acknowledge the guidance and the gracious presence of Srimati Tejal Amin, Chairperson, Navrachna Education Society. This Foundation Day lecture series has been initiated by Professor Nilay Yagnik. Thank you, sir, for initiating this idea and creating this wonderful platform. My sincere thanks to all the participants for being with us on this momentous day and this occasion. Thank you, Dinesh Panchal, Head, Center for Professional Education, for all the technical support. Good evening to all and have a pleasant evening. Thank you so much.